sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing at all. Even more so, and this is the genius of Charlie Munger, when you have a ton of cash, the sort of the impetus or the desire to do notches up, right? You have all these ideas in front of you. You have all this cash sitting there. It's like, oh, let's go do these six more things. You can sort of trick yourself into going and do something just because you have the money, not because it's the highest ROI thing you can do.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, my guest is Rob Goldenberg, the CFO of 6sense, a B2B predictive intelligence engine that uses AI, machine learning, and big data to help sales and marketing teams find the best accounts to target. On this episode, we cover how finance and accounting are internal and external service orgs at their cores, ways to politely negotiate with your vendors and still get what you want, why tool consolidation is overrated. Yes, a CFO thinks this. Frameworks for managing spend during tough times, how your greatest strengths can become your greatest weaknesses, what it means to catch the falling knife, don't do it, and the difference between one-way and two-way doors. Rob's been the CFO at 6sense for more than 9 years. He's helped the company grow from an upstart to a late-stage unicorn and expanded his scope from just finance and accounting to also cover BI and HR. During his tenure, he's managed during high and low macro environments. Not only does Rob have all the tools in his toolbox to approach these situations, he also has the rare communication skills to convey how others, like me and you, can rely upon them as well. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Quick math, the less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to Netsuite by Oracle. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With Netsuite, you reduce IT costs because Netsuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, you know your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. Cash is king. As the CFO of a SaaS company, I know firsthand how important it is to maintain a healthy AR balance. If you can't effectively manage cash, you can't service debt, make payroll, or invest in growing your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster by automating collections and dunning. Gone are the days of manually chasing down invoices. Join the 2,500 plus subscription businesses using Maxio, formerly SaaS Optics and Chargeify, to eliminate revenue leakage and streamline order to cash. It's never been easier to get paid. Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support this podcast, ya boy, you'll also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Woo! That's maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Rob, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Cool. Great to be here.
Before we get into the thick of things, do you think Microsoft Excel will ever die?
I think the question should be, will Google Sheets ever die? And that would be just fine with me.
I share your same feelings. I I kind of feel like a coder sometimes who learned PHP or Java or something like that. And then they switch me over to this other thing, Sheets, where like I lose all my shortcuts and stuff. And I just feel like an idiot. So part of it may just be the inertia of me feeling like I'm losing a skill that I worked on for 10 years, but I still hate Sheets.
It's not only just that I think that it's losing a skill, it's losing a skill for no discernible reason. Right? I'm always happy to learn new things, but not when there's no actual value in learning something else, right? I feel like to get up to speed on Google Sheets, it's like, oh, you got to relearn it all over again to have maybe the same functionality.
I think that AI actually would be great to implement within Microsoft Excel, similar how they've done for like GitHub Copilot. Like to me, that just seems like a no-brainer for helping me with like really long sum ifs or index matches.
Although it does take away some of the misplaced pride in being able to write that yourself.
I remember I worked with this guy before who, like, he admitted that he was like a super nerd and he had never played like organized sports before. And I remember he was like, CJ, what does it feel like to score a touchdown? He's like, I imagine it's like when you write a really long sum if that goes like 4 lines and you hit enter and it goes through on the first time. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah, I can relate.
I want to talk about the role of finance, and you have this philosophy that you told me about that every finance and accounting person needs to implement. I was hoping you can unpack that for us, because there are probably a lot of people out there who have made implementation their day job for a short period of time and wanted to pull their hair out. So why should finance and accounting people implement?
So I think that, and this is not something new, right? Alignment in a company or in a team is crucially important, right? With it, you can do great things. Without it, things just seem to go wrong. So to drive alignment within finance and accounting, I think it's important to have at least some type of framework. The one we use at 6sense, which is not new to the world, it's new to 6sense when I came here, has a number of layers, but it starts with 3 pillars. And the framework is this. It's, what do we do in finance and accounting? Well, we save time, we save money, and we support the company objectives. And by the way, in the company objectives, regardless of where you work, it's something that smells like, build a great product or service, sell that product or service, make the customer successful with that product or service, rinse and repeat. So those are the 3 pillars. Then underlying that, what I tell the team is we always have to have an eye to process, policy, and compliance, which I think seems sort of obvious in finance and accounting, but it's not just narrowly within finance and accounting. We can sort of be the ones to bring that process, policy, and compliance rigor to the rest of the company. And then finally, there's sort of an overarching umbrella, which is the idea of finance and accounting being an internal and external service org. Many finance and accounting teams do not necessarily act like a service org, or maybe they think they do. But I can guarantee you a lot of other parts of the business do not view finance and accounting like they would view the concierge at a Four Seasons hotel. They view us somehow differently, and I guess worse. And I think it's really important that you lean into that type of level of service for the other groups. And what this whole framework ultimately both allows for and fosters is not just alignment, but it also allows even the most junior folks on the team to essentially act like decision makers or act like leaders, right? Because they have a framework to lean on, as opposed to, say, having to ask their manager every little question that comes up, right? And that's inefficient for the individual contributor and their manager. And oftentimes, like, if I'm a manager, actually I am a manager, if I'm getting a whole lot of simple questions, I start maybe tuning out a little bit. So I think if you implement that framework well, it's a great foundation just for anything else you want to accomplish.
And you mentioned being a concierge both internally and externally. Internally, totally agree. Like, I think a lot of, if I think about going to the IT help desk for something, I also sometimes think that finance should be like that. Like, I don't think we should give out tickets, but you should think about, like, this is my customer. I'm trying to help them solve a problem with maybe their budget or resource allocation. Can you talk about externally as well? I haven't heard it phrased in that way.
Externally, let's take 2 cases, I guess, right? And in my role, I deal with a lot of customers and I deal with a lot of vendors.
Yeah.
And the nature of those conversations are diametrically opposed, obviously.
Yeah.
And let's take the easy one first. With your customers, they might have a question like, or an ask more often, can we change X, Y, and Z in the contract? Which is clearly, well, it's not in the contract already. It's in the customer's favor. It's probably not in my company's favor. And you can react a couple ways to that. You can say, absolutely not. Why are you even asking me this? You can snap at them.
Yeah.
I think most of us, we don't snap at our customers, but maybe we're thinking that in our heads. But I would suggest that instead you should sit there, listen, have your internal negative reaction, and then start asking questions of the customer until you really understand what they're looking for. Ultimately, you're probably going to say no, but the nature of that conversation goes better. I think it's with vendors where we fall into the trap, right? We all sort of like to put the screws to our vendors. You can put the screws to your vendors while being nice about it and actually working with them. And, folks talk about partnership, but when you're buying, let's say, a software tool, there's a tendency not to act like a partner and act like you're putting the screws to your vendor. I would suggest not necessarily doing that.
I think you also have to remember that the people on the other side of the table have to eat too. Like, you can have a deal that's still good. Maybe it's not, home run great, but it's still good for both sides. And then it allows you to have the door open upon renewal, because I did turn the screws to somebody on a pretty big contract. It was actually something that auto renewed in our favor. And I went back and said, no, we're not changing that. And it saved hundreds of thousands of dollars for us, but they turned the screws back on me the next year when it came back around. So it was one of those things where I took this short-term win where maybe looking back, I should have took a middle ground to help preserve some respect on both sides.
There always give to gets, right? And if you really get into it, there might be things that's easy for that vendor to give that's very valuable to you, and vice versa. And I'm not sure we always find all those great give to gets in a negotiation or contracting process.
That's an excellent call out. It's kind of like there are these non-pricing terms in there. Like maybe it's payment terms. Is it instead of net 30, can you give me net 60? Or can I pay you quarterly rather than annually up front? So that's a good call out. I'm glad you brought up vendors, Rob, because there's been this wave of thinking that all CFOs should try to consolidate onto just a limited set of platforms for better visibility and ideally better cost savings. What's your view on that?
So I have a very strong answer on this that I give every time, and it's one word, and it's depends.
Yeah.
Which doesn't seem particularly useful. But what's interesting is that I feel like these tool consolidation questions come up in a very haphazard or ad hoc way, right? The way it normally comes up is you're looking 3 months out and you have some software vendor that's up for renewal. And now you start talking about tool consolidation narrowly around whatever's coming up for renewal in the near or medium term. I don't think that way of approaching tool consolidation is necessarily the best way. In fact, sometimes it's maybe even destructive to value. So I think, and actually I read an article you published on this, but you got it. I think you really need to step back, and it's not even just narrowly in finance and accounting, because we're responsible for the spend on all the other tools in the company, and essentially create a matrix or a map of all the important processes and issues and how you're going to map them up with the massive variety of potential software vendors out there. Now, to actually give you an answer to your question, I start with a bucket of places where we need help from various tools, and that bucket is fairly broad, but it includes things like compliance, security, major company-wide processes, and foundational tools, right? And this bucket is going to have requirements where what would fall in there. It's everything from a single sign-on provider to an email platform to log monitoring to accounting software, your ERP. You go through, you locate all these different places, you You pick the tools that you think would work best. You make sure they work well together. But then we got to go on to the next phase. And for me, that next phase is in and around automation. So narrowly defined in accounting, maybe it's an auto-dunning tool. More broadly, or on the sales side, maybe it's an e-signature platform or a ticketing system, or back in accounting, close automation software. And then you get to the third stop in this journey, which is where are there gaps and where can we really lean in and drive ROI? And this could include anything from a really big project like a data warehouse to a BI tool to 6sense and in and around sales and marketing efficiency. And by the way, the data science team is going to say a BI tool is foundational, right? A marketing team might say 6sense is foundational. This is where the iteration aspect comes in. And you can actually now make a well-considered decision around where you can consolidate tools and where it's important to not consolidate, right? And the not consolidate idea is, well, you need a best-in-class point solution to solve XYZ process because it's so absolutely critical. And ultimately, it's a question of balancing the cost and the benefit of tool consolidation. But with that long ramble, let me give you two examples.
No, this is good. And I like how you laid out the framework of how you put the tools in the different buckets first, because that's important before you go into consolidate something. You have to know where it sits within the org, and if it's a point solution or if you're just trying to do something stupid that's going to like impact your ERP.
Yeah. Those are the worst.
Yeah.
Gotta love breaking your ERP. So if I think of two examples, let's take Workday. Workday has a very strong human capital management platform. They also have accounting software.
Yep.
Just because you have Workday HCM really doesn't make it a no-brainer to go on their accounting platform, right? Your accounting software, well, you really want best in class there. And let's go with a counter example, thinking back to the Google Sheets versus Microsoft Excel. If you're going to go with Gmail as your email platform, you probably got to go with Google Sheets. If you're going with Outlook as your email platform, you're going to have real problems if you don't go with Excel.
You have to think about if the tools play nice together. But at the same time, like I do think we've over-rotated, because I got a call from my friend who's in sales a couple weeks ago, and he said, CJ, get this. We got rid of tool XYZ to buy Salesforce's tool that apparently does something similar. I'm pretty sure we're the only company ever to get rid of tool XYZ and go onto Salesforce. So I was like, well, why the hell would you do that? He's like, every sales guy is pissed here. And he said, oh, because the CFO said we needed to cut costs, and by consolidating on one vendor platform, it would look better. But he's like, they didn't ask any of us, if we were using it and like how important this was to what we did day to day. And B, like they've completely broken our workflows, thinking that just by going with the same vendor it'll work.
It's funny you say that. I feel like tool consolidation always over-rotates in a difficult economy, but I don't put the blame on the difficult economy. In the example you just gave, that just sounds like bad practice in FP&A.
Right.
It's one thing to shrink budgets. It's another thing to pick specific tools or hires or, really make foundational and nitpicky business decisions for other groups, right? At some point, you gotta say, okay, we're shrinking the budget. Here's why. Explain it, and then give them some real leeway to decide what's important to them.
I'll go as far within my budgets to put like brackets around, like I've been told we need a bucket for a feature flagging tool, but like I'm not smart enough to know who's best in class for a feature flagging tool. Like that would be like overly prescriptive and potentially harmful to the org.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. You're someone listening to this podcast, Rob, who is looking for funding for an important initiative or tool. Do you have any advice on how to coach them for asking for it?
Yes, and I wish everybody who asks me for anything would listen to this. And I try to tell them so I guess there are three different pieces of advice. First and foremost is if somebody's coming and asking me to fund something that's not line itemed in the budget, it would be great if they already came with ideas where the money might come from. We'll get rid of XYZ tool to get this other tool, right? And the idea comes from them, and it demonstrates that they're thinking about this. They understand that there's swim lanes and budgets and constraints to live within, and they're coming with a collaborative attitude. By the way, I think sometimes the way they come in is they build a amazing business case that shows spectacular ROI before they've ever talked to me or somebody on the FP&A team, and they come in a little hot and say, look at this is going to give us massive returns. And by the way, if we don't get it, the sky is falling, we can't function, we're going to lose our people. I mean, pick 15 different sort of nuclear scenarios that could come out.
I hear you there. I think I want you to come with a business case, but I also want you to come with a set of points that you want to discuss, not hey, we have it all figured out, because it is a team effort to figure out where you come up with that extra pocket of cash to make it work.
Right. The way they ask is so important.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody comes and says, I need your help figuring out how to pay for this. That's a great way to start, not only start a conversation, but true collaboration. And then there's a second one. And this is really actually for B2B marketers. Right. So in my job, one of our target personas is B2B marketers. And I get the question all the time, and it's relevant outside that. That's why I'm sharing it. But I get the question all the time, and it's, Rob, what argument or what way works best for someone like me coming to someone like you to get money for brand advertising? Right. Brand advertising, of course, being very different from, say, demand gen marketing. Right. Demand gen marketing is, 5 steps closer to actually generating revenue than overall brand advertising or brand marketing. By the way, brand marketing is not cheap. The example that I've heard and that I use is, let's say a marketer at a B2B company wants to sponsor a player on the PGA Tour.
Yeah.
How on earth do you approach an FP&A person or CFO with that ask? I don't even know what it costs, but I can guarantee you it's not inexpensive. And this one, I think the lens to approach this is through something that looks like a competitive or benchmarking analysis. Actually, if we stick with the PGA golfer, if you're a marketer and you look around and you see your 3 top competitors all sponsor PGA golfers, and they all bring companies that we'd love to have as customers to the Masters every year. And we're not doing that. And by the way, we don't have as good traction in those, ultra mega huge corporate customers, there starts to be a little FOMO, but there's a real, that's a real business case in and around why it might make sense for us as a business to go and drop a ton of cash to sponsor a golfer.
That was a really honest assessment of that, because there are different ways that you could, I was watching NBA basketball the other night, come to a CFO and be like, hey, I think we need to be like on the jersey patch or like behind the hoop. And there are like very basic ways you could bring it up. And sometimes when you allude to brand marketing, like my mind just immediately goes to, so you don't know what the return is and it's going to be expensive. But there are other ways to come about it that target the segments that you're actually going after and start to build a business case, even if the outcome is still a bit ambiguous. Yeah. Rob, there are two components to managing spend during tough times. The first is communicating the message carefully, and then the second is actually executing on that strategy. We had talked earlier about like, don't get angry at the macro environment. It's like, don't get angry at the weather when it rains. You can't blame it on the rain. But for any younger CFOs out there, aspiring CFOs, how do you go about those two steps, communicating carefully and then executing?
I think it's got to start with a high-level company definition of swim lanes or the playing field that you're actually playing on. And let's go with software companies, right? What are the swim lanes for this year, maybe even the next 2 years? Define them, and then you need everybody in the business to both understand what it is you're talking about, really comprehend it, and then buy in. So that you're all on the same page. And I don't know how to stress how important this process is. So let's put some numbers on it. And I'll pull these from more generic software land. Software company that's grown 25%, all else equal, probably has a revenue multiple that's twice as big as a software company grown 10%.
Sure.
I think this is, you just get it as a finance professional. I'm guessing a lot of other folks in the company don't necessarily get it or don't necessarily know sort of where that break point is on revenue growth, right? So you got to decide, are we the 10% grower or are we the 25% grower? And let's say it's the 25% grower just for the purposes of this example. Well, that's one swim lane. What's the other really, really big one? I would go directly to profit margin or operating margin. Say, okay, we have a revenue growth sort of target or swim lane we really want to be operating in. And then we also have a profitability constraint. Constraint might not be the best way to say it. Let's stick with swim lane, but you have to hit something on the profitability side. Yeah. And I think for today's software companies, it's 20% plus operating margins, or at least a clear path on how you're going to get there based on your unit economics. So now you got these two swim lanes, and if you can get folks to really understand it, then you go and when you hand out budgets, it's not really handing out a budget. It's like, okay, we all understand these are the constraints we need to play in. This is what it means for our budget. So you're already sort of in a better place when it gets to that point. Now, of course, folks are going to say they need more money, right? That it happens and you work with it. But I think what this does is it allows you to start with, and we were talking about this before, right? On the salesperson getting a tool canceled on them. You start with a budget and then you ask them to go prioritize within that budget what they want. And what it means is when the rubber really hits the road, let's move out of sales. Let's go to HR. Let's say your HR person needs an incremental head, or they want to allocate some budget to an incremental head, internal learning. So an actual person who's training folks internally. Or they could go out and get a learning management system, right? So it's a quasi software solution. And now let's say I think they should go get the tool and not the person.
Yeah.
You can't tell them. You can't say, no, you have to get the tool, not the person. I would say, and this I think is really important advice, you don't say no. You play devil's advocate. You give, very logical feedback. And ultimately, if your HR leader wants a person, not a tool, and it's within the budget constraint, you got to let them do that. Really, in any scenario where it's truly just, fungibility of dollars and doesn't touch on, like a compliance issue or a process issue or something like that.
So that's big of you, first of all, because a lot of CFOs, if you think about the funnel, 100% of CFOs, maybe only 50% would be like, yeah, okay, I don't really see it that way, but I'll let you go for it because that's the budget envelope. But even fewer, maybe only 25%, would, if it goes wrong, not come back and told you, I told you so. You should have chose the other one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can't say I told you so, but you can remember.
Yeah.
And the remembering, by the way, isn't so you can stick it to somebody when they make an ask for budget. If you remember, it helps you build trust because some of their decisions are going to be spot on right where you might have been wrong and vice versa. But if you remember both sides of them, I mean, that's the only way you build a long-term trust and relationship with your various business partners. Is right. You go through the muck with them.
Yeah. Rob, something that strikes me just hearing you talk about how you communicate during a tough environment is you're providing people with context on where the business is at and context of kind of how it impacts their budget.
Right. There's context and communication. I think we can always do better on both. Because a lot of times I think I communicated something perfectly and folks should know this and they don't know it or they didn't understand it. And that's my fault, not theirs. But it's like the engineers when they talk to me. I understand 10% of what they say.
Yeah.
And that's after working in tech for a really long time. I started out at about 1%. And it's not because I'm somehow less than or not intelligent. It's just the engineers do that every day and I don't. The same is true for, all the rest of the folks in the business who aren't in finance and accounting. And I think we forget that because in many ways, folks say finance or numbers is the language of business. Right. So people will generally be more knowledgeable about what I do than I will be knowledgeable about what an engineer does. And that can be misleading and lead to poor communication.
Rob, I want to talk about frameworks for a bit here. I was looking at your profile on the 6sense website and you had a quote that struck me. I believe it was Charlie Munger. And the quote was, "It takes character to sit with all that cash and do nothing." Why is that a quote you like?
For starters, rest in peace, Charlie Munger.
Yeah, I know. Right.
God, great guy. Obviously I didn't know him, but everything I saw, he was just pure genius. But that quote in particular is important for me because there's an idea that in some cases your greatest strengths can become your greatest weakness.
Say more.
So for me, I think that one of my greatest strengths is that I have an extreme bias towards action, right? When I come up with something or when I see something, I want to do something about it, right? I want to take action. I want to optimize. And it's worked very well for me in my career. But every now and then, the right thing to do is to do nothing. So that quote for me resonates. It reminds me every now and then, sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing at all. Even more so, and this is the genius of Charlie Munger, when you have a ton of cash, the sort of the impetus or the desire to do notches up, right? You have all these ideas in front of you. You have all this cash sitting there. It's like, oh, let's go do these six more things. The example I use and what I went through when, we raised a ton of money in the boom times. There are probably 20 countries on the list that we could expand into. And we had the money to go after half of them. But that one's an extreme example. That's clearly not a great idea. There are other examples where you can sort of trick yourself into going and do something just because you have the money, not because it's the highest ROI thing you can do.
Yeah, man. When you get money burning a hole in your pocket, you start to greenlight some B and C projects.
Yeah. Although I got to tell you, the one great thing about interest rates going up is all that money's actually earning money now.
Yeah.
Within an acceptable risk profile.
So whenever I do my month update to the company on where we are, one of the stats I include is how many, and I always put it in terms of people, how many engineers we were able to hire with the money that we earned on interest. That way it doesn't seem like, we're just letting it sit there and do nothing. We're putting it to work.
Oh, I'm going to go do that now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've hired 2.5 engineers this year on my interest. The next one I got for you, you told me, quote, "Don't ignore good advice." What did you mean by that? Do people tend to ignore good advice?
I mean, obviously not ignoring good advice is critical to success, but what I found is not ignoring good advice or taking good advice is actually learned behavior.
Really?
At least it was for me. Maybe I'm unique in this. I don't think so. Now that we're talking about investing money, I'll use an example from my personal investment portfolio. Back in the day, I used to love to try and catch the falling knife, right? So I'd watch a stock, it was doing great.
Ooh.
There was a bump in the road, it was down 20%, and I'd be ready to dive in. And I got advice from lots of people. They're like, there's a name for this. It's called trying to catch a falling knife. Just by the name, I mean, you can tell it doesn't end well, right? You end up losing the finger or another 30% on whichever stock you bought. It took me about 3 times of getting bit by that one before I learned to not ignore that particular advice. I think it's important because, one, human beings, I believe, are in some ways hardwired to want to ignore or dismiss unsolicited advice, whether it's good or bad, to the point where we might become combative at worst, or more likely we just don't even listen. And if you're not listening, you're never going to learn that behavior about being able to filter through the tons and tons of advice that you get and find the nuggets that really help change outcomes.
I also have some friends who ask for advice, but it's like they're asking for confirmatory advice. And I can see like their eyes, they're like listening to me, but it's not going through. And that always pisses me off when I know somebody's asking me for advice, but if it's not the advice that they want me to give them, that they're just going to throw it away.
Do you do anything different? Do you say it? Do you tell them?
I say, you're not going to do that, are you? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, I try not to say, don't tell me that I told you so. But at the same time, like, it's usually the same people who are asking for only the advice they want to hear. There are also some people, I feel like, in the business world who ask for advice just to have a conversation, but then they don't use the advice. And so I always have that in my head now when people ask for advice, like, what's the lens they're coming to me with this from? And do I actually think they're going to follow up on it? You've managed through a number of different macroeconomic climates at 6sense and in your CFO career. When you're approached with a difficult decision, do you have any frameworks or steps that you go through before, jumping to an answer? For
sure. The first step is figuring out which of 2 buckets it falls into. I think that there are generally speaking 2 types of difficult decisions. But before I get to that, my advice on both, by the way, is to rip off the Band-Aid as soon as practical, and then execute or proceed with confidence, because the timing of when you make the decision and the way you implement a tough decision will almost always impact the outcome of that decision, either positively or negatively. Now, the first type of tough decision are those decisions where you kind of know, or you really know what the right choice is, but you don't want to make the right choice for emotional reasons. A good example, back to budget, cutting someone's budget, maybe allocating it to someone else. You probably know that's the right thing to do, but it can lead to some hurt feelings. And, I don't like to do that to my colleagues. A lot of my colleagues are good friends at this point, right? And I know it has real significant impact for them, but, I know what's best for the business, and you just got to do it, to the point where, I just have a strict rule, which is just do what's best for the business every single time. Don't make exceptions. And to a certain extent, once you've done your thinking and identified what's right for the business, you just act. And then, of course, you explain why. And those decisions, they're straightforward. They're not easy. In fact, those are some of the toughest ones, especially when you're talking about something that might mean somebody's job. The second type is where you might just not know the right answer. And on top of that, the cost of not choosing wisely is either very high or very difficult to quantify or define. In this sort of bucket of decision making, it's where I find most that people will often go overboard in trying to gather data to make a fact-based decision, But at some point, there's serious diminishing returns to going out and getting more and more data.
Say more about that, because I think it's so true.
I mean, there's an expression, right? Analysis paralysis. But let's I guess, let's use an example, right? Most companies at some point in their life cycle decide to expand beyond their domestic market. Picking which market to go to next can really be like a 2-week process. This is such a well-worn path. The framework you implement it's like you could get a consultant. They're probably overly priced and you probably don't need them, but you can get a consultant who's done this hundreds of times before, right? And after that maybe it's a 4-week project, you're ready to make a decision. And I find that most companies will drag this out for potentially a year or years. And when they're dragging it out, they rely on what I believe is an excuse that they don't have enough data to really make the decision. They don't have enough data to ensure that the decision is the right one. And let's say you're US founded and headquartered, and you've narrowed it down. We can go into, let's say, Japan or Australia next. That's fairly straightforward to analyze, right? There might be a language barrier in Japan. There might be a total addressable market issue in Australia. And it's a pretty standard checklist. But once you have that checklist figured out, it's time to pick one of the 3 options. The 3 options, by the way, are Japan, Australia, or back to Charlie Munger, genuinely do nothing right now. Yeah. Right? And it means stop analyzing it for 6 months.
I used to work with this guy who was big on creating frameworks to evaluate things like that. It was actually a country prioritization framework. Shout out Austin. What he taught me was like all the different ways you would weight the impact of going into something, like based on your propensity to win there, based on the actual market size, based on the fragmentation, based on if we already had people there. And he used to say, well, if you agree with the inputs, then we all have to agree with the outputs. And a lot of times what you'd see would happen is you put in the inputs and it would come out with an output of a decision you should just make based on what you said, like based on a 2-week analysis. And people say, well, I don't feel comfortable. I feel like we don't have enough data there. And it's like, well, now you're just making no decision. And I don't mean no decision in the sense of like, let's just sit on the cash, like in a good way. It's just like, let's just think about it more. And that's not helpful for anybody.
Yeah. It's like, that falls into the bucket, I think, of, it's almost like best argument wins.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not a great way to make decisions.
Best argument wins. Yeah, I've been in a couple of those before. And it's just like, who's the better debater here? Not what's best for the business. Rob, you strike me as someone who's pretty data-driven in their decision-making. And we can always strike this if you don't have a good answer for it or if you don't want to answer it. But can you recall any time where you made a decision just based on gut feel and not based on data?
When we were expanding as a company, we took a path that was maybe a little bit different than the typical startup. Now, we were a startup 9 years ago. Our core initial customer cohort were very, very large enterprise. So think 5,000 employee companies and above.
Wow, those are big.
Yeah, and we slowly, adjusted our product and made our product more easy to use so we could address customer cohorts that are sort of closer to that SMB side of the market, but not necessarily on the true SMB side. And we had a key decision point. Were we going to go spend the time in product and engineering and then in marketing and in sales to really be able to provide the same ROI to an SMB customer that we do to a very large enterprise, and do all the things that go with that? And we did the analysis and we did all the work, and it probably took about 3 weeks. And the results were not necessarily conclusive. And at that point, me and others on the exec team, we decided to go with our gut. Now, you can define your gut in many different ways. I like to think the best version of your gut is not just some amorphous feeling that this would be a good idea. Rather, it's the product of years of experience and decision making, both good and bad, and all the learnings from that now give you a way to actually make good decisions without your brain's capacity to fully comprehend exactly why. And that was a decision we made as a team, which was we had to go a little bit beyond the numbers, not wildly so, but a little bit. It's worked out well, so that's good. Although maybe that encourages more decision making like that, which I wouldn't encourage. I mean, that's for me, that type of decision with that type of consequence is like a once in every 3 to 5 year type of thing.
Do you think that was kind of a bet the business type decision?
Oh no, close enough. That's numbers person and somewhat conservative. I can't make those.
That's a great anecdote. Thanks for sharing that. And I like what you said about your going with your gut is almost like a compounding of decisions and mistakes that you've made over time. Because people sometimes chalk it up to just like, I don't know, a premonition or a good feeling about something. It's an accumulation of experiences and mistakes that I've made that make me want to lean in one direction versus the other. Rob, I'm going to take us into what we call our long ass lightning round. So the first question that I ask every CFO, you're an accomplished guy, but give me one thing you've messed up in your career.
So this goes back to learnings, and let's start real early in my career.
Okay.
I used to be an investment banker, like all junior investment bankers. A big part of my job was making 100+ page presentation decks to bring to meetings with our clients or companies that we wanted to have be our clients. And we had 2 meetings. I actually got to go to these. That was like my reward for spending 3 weeks of my life making these pitch decks. One was for an oil and gas company. The other was for a cable company. And in both of their pitch decks, each one had a page that was just a list of public comps for one in oil and gas and for the other in cable. And I, of course, switched the 2 tables. Right, I was toggling back and forth from PowerPoint to Excel, and I pasted a list of cable companies into the oil and gas pitch deck and a list of oil and gas companies into a cable pitch deck. The oil and gas company was the first meeting, by the way, so we discovered it in that one, actually because the CEO and CFO of that oil and gas company had no desire to see our pitch deck. They just wanted to see an update on their publicly traded competitors.
Oh,
so that was the one page we went to, and it was wrong. There were 2 learnings from that, by the way. One is nobody other than me still remembers that incident. In fact, I think everybody else probably forgot it.
Oh, I love that.
If not hours, maybe days. Maybe it took them days to forget it. I, of course, still remember. But that was a learning where I don't know if it helped me develop my gut instinct, but it helped me develop a sense of prioritization. We're going to make mistakes, but how do you prioritize what you're spending your time on and what you're focusing on so you don't make a mistake like showing, Shell a list of cable companies.
I like how you said, though, that nobody else remembers it, because it sounds like you're harder on yourself than anyone else could be.
Yeah. Aren't we all, though? I read something once that says we hear negative feedback 5 times as loudly as we hear positive feedback.
Oh, I believe that. All right, next one. If you could tell your younger self something, knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
There would be a lot of things. My mind always goes to Back to the Future, where somebody gives them like the outcomes
sports
of
betting
all the
book?
sporting events. But let's put that aside. The absolute top of the list would be straightforward to say, hard to implement, which is form good habits in everything you do, work life or personal life. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of what we do every day is habitual. So that means that having good habits, well, that has a massive positive impact, and having bad habits is really, really destructive.
My advice would be bet on the Red Sox to win in 2004.
Yes. Go Sox.
Yeah, go Sox, exactly. Next one here, software. What's the most recent tool you bought?
So as we grow as a business, one of the key areas we need to upgrade is essentially our ability to forecast.
Yeah.
And we went and we bought a new planning and forecasting and budgeting tool called Pigment, which I think at this point is fairly well known in the market. And it's just for that. It's for our budgeting, 6-quarter rolling forecast, budget to actuals. And there are a number of real solid tools that do this, right? There's Planful. Actually, we don't even need to name all of them, but this one is going to be real important for us for all the obvious reasons. And we're actually in month 2 of implementation.
Nice. So you get it in right in time for annual planning season in August, September, right?
That's the idea. Although annual planning season seems to start earlier and earlier every year.
I know. It really does. You can't get out of the summer anymore without starting it, which sucks.
Yeah.
What's the craziest thing you've ever seen somebody try to expense?
See, it depends on the day. It depends which one pops to mind first. Right now, because I'm doing some home improvement, I remember somebody once expensed a refrigerator for their house.
Ooh.
Turns out, fortunately, it was a mistaken submission, pile of receipts or something. I will give the submitter, I will give them full credit that it was a mistake. I hear your comment. That one, I don't think I'm really all that emotional. I nearly blew a gasket when I saw that.
Is there another one that makes you emotional? I feel like there's something else here.
There's the normal stuff, right? When you find out somebody submitted their vacation with their wife for their anniversary as a work trip. But that one's just straight up fraud, and we all catch the fraud every now and then. Although I remember 20 years ago it was a lot harder. The fraud triangle, right? I remember the fraud triangle being taught in classes. Now I guess we don't put as much emphasis on it.
What's the fraud triangle? This is new. I haven't heard this.
It's basically trying to put a framework around how and why there's fraud within a company.
Okay.
And the three corners of the triangle are, forgive me, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
There's motive, opportunity, and rationalization. So think motive, somebody doesn't think they're getting paid enough.
Yep.
Or no, somebody doesn't have enough money, right?
Motive,
Right. And, okay, maybe I can somehow get some out of submitting expenses. Well, then how do they rationalize that? The company doesn't pay me enough. I work so hard and they only pay me X and I deserve Y. And then there's the opportunity piece where I think actually software vendors and businesses in general have done a good job focusing, is taking away that opportunity. It's a lot harder now, right, to like sort of fake a receipt or sort of get away with it because, all your expenses are probably reviewed by at this point 3 levels of people, and you got your ramp card, which can take away half the opportunity. But that's the fraud triangle.
I learned something today. I learned a lot of things today. Rob, this has been a blast. I love how deep of a thinker you are. And also, I just want to say, if you ever want to create a podcast, you have a great deep voice for it. So just keep it in your mind.
Thank you for that. I hear the thing on the voice. What's weird is I live in Connecticut and people in Connecticut ask me where I'm from with my accent. So I don't know where it comes from.
Huh. Well, you got a great voice for radio and podcasting. Just don't come into my category. I don't need more competition.
Sounds good. CJ, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.